Hello, friends. We want to know from which cities you listen to us. Like and write in the comments where you are from. And also share what shocking stories happened in your city or even to you. Subscribe, because the next story may be about your city or your personal drama. And now a new exciting story. Vincent Rossi, known to everyone as Vince, drove his pickup truck down Michigan Avenue, weaving through Chicago's late-night traffic. It was early June, and the city was bustling with activity. Cars honking, pedestrians hurrying along the sidewalks, and neon signs flashing at bars and restaurants, beckoning customers. Vince was oblivious to the bustle. His mind was on something else. The receipt from the Luna bar he'd found in Emily's coat pocket 2 days ago. It was for 2 drinks, dated the previous Thursday, when she'd said she'd be at work until midnight. He gripped the steering wheel harder than necessary and muttered under his breath. "Damn it, Emily, what are you doing?" Vince owned 3 coffee shops in Chicago, a family business his parents had started in the 1970s when they came from Italy. Rossi Coffee was famous for its strong espresso and the homemade cinnamon rolls his mother still baked. Vince was proud of the business, but it seemed distant now, as if someone else had been running the shops while he was drowning in his suspicions. He glanced at the clock on the dashboard. 7:32 p.m. Emily would be home in an hour, unless she was delayed again. Vince felt irritation rise in his chest. They had been married for 7 years, and until last month, he had never doubted her. Emily had been his rock, smart, sharp-tongued, always knowing how to cheer him up after a hard day. But now something was different. She seemed distant, checking her phone more often, and her smile seemed forced. Vince stopped at a traffic light and rubbed his temples. A memory from 5 years ago came to mind. He had just opened his second coffee shop, and business was slow. Emily, not yet his wife, had sat with him at the kitchen table until 3 in the morning, helping him write a marketing plan. "Vince, you're going to do it," she said then, poking him in the shoulder. "Your coffee shops are going to be the best in Chicago, and I'm going to help you, whether you want it or not." "You're too stubborn, you know," he replied, laughing. "And you're too slow. Kiss me already, idiot." That kiss changed his world. A year later, they were married. Vince was sure he had found his soulmate. But now, looking out at the city lights, he wondered if he had ever known Emily. The light turned green and Vince hit the gas. He remembered finding the receipt. It was Saturday, when he was looking for his keys in the hallway. Emily's coat was hanging on the coat rack, and he instinctively reached into his pocket. The receipt was crumpled, but the numbers and the name of the bar were legible. 2 cocktails, 10:15 p.m. Emily had said she was meeting with a client, but who drinks cocktails with a client at a place like Luna's? Vince had never been there, but he knew it was a trendy bar in the West Loop where young professionals hung out. He wanted to ask her right away, but he changed his mind. Emily came home late, smelling of perfume and fatigue, and he just couldn't get the question out. Instead, he lay next to her in bed, listening to her even breathing, and felt a lump growing in his chest. Vince turned onto a side street, heading toward his home in the Lincoln Park neighborhood. He knew he couldn't keep this inside for much longer. He needed someone to help him sort this out. And that person was Dom Lombardi, his cousin. "The house will understand," Vince said out loud, as if convincing himself. "It always knows what to do." Dom was 4 years older than Vince and owned an auto repair shop north of town. He wasn't just a cousin, he was almost a brother. When Vince was 15 and Dom had just returned from the army, he had pulled him out of a fight with some local hoodlums. From then on, Vince knew that if he was in trouble, Dom was the first person he'd go to. Vince parked at the house, but didn't get out of the car. He took out his phone and dialed Dom's number. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, Vince, what's up?" Dom's voice was hoarse but warm. The clanking of instruments could be heard in the background. "Are you still in the workshop?" Vince asked, trying to sound calm. "Yeah, I'm finishing up with one car." "What's wrong with you? You seem out of sorts." Vince paused, choosing his words. "I need to talk." "Not on the phone. Can you meet tomorrow?" "Tomorrow?" Dom chuckled. "Let's do it now. I'll be here until 9. Come by." Just bring some pizza. I haven't eaten since morning. Seriously, Dom, this is not urgent, but important. Vince, don't talk nonsense. If you're calling at 8 in the evening with that voice, it's an emergency. Pepperoni pizza and get over here. Vince couldn't help but smile. Okay, you win. I'll be there in an hour. He hung up and exhaled. Dom always had a way of pulling him out of the dark, but Vince knew this conversation wouldn't be easy. He started the engine and drove to the nearest pizza place. The memories came flooding back as Vince waited for his order. 7 years ago, before their wedding, his grandmother Rose had pulled him aside. They were sitting in her backyard, where it smelled of basil and tomato sauce. Rose, petite, but with a look that made even Dom quiet, put her hand on his shoulder. Vincent, she said, Emily is beautiful, smart, but there's something slippery about her. I'm not saying she's bad, but watch out. Take care of your heart, okay? Grandma, you're too suspicious, he replied then, laughing. Emily isn't like that. She loves me. Rose just shook her head. Love is one thing, son. Trust is another. Don't confuse them. Vince brushed her words aside, but now they sounded prophetic. He picked up the pizza, got in his car, and drove to Dom's shop. As he drove, he tried to think of what he would say. Hey, Dom, I think my wife is cheating on me. Or, I found the check, and now I don't know what to think. It all sounded stupid, but he knew Dom wouldn't laugh. Dom's shop was in a nondescript building on the edge of the west side. The sign reading Lombardi Auto was old, but the interior was bustling with mechanics tinkering with cars and the radio playing classic rock. Vince walked in, holding a pizza box, and immediately saw Dom wiping his hands on a rag. Well, finally, Dom said, grinning. I thought you were lost. Come on, I'm faster than you with a wrench, Vince replied, placing the pizza on the table in the corner. Dom nodded to one of the mechanics to close up shop and sat down across from Vince. He opened the box, picked up a slice of pizza, and took a bite. Okay, spill it, he said with his mouth full. What's the matter? Vince took the check out of his pocket and placed it on the table. It was in Emily's coat. Luna Bar, Thursday, 10 o'clock. She said she was at work. Dom took the check, looked at it, and frowned. Luna, that trendy bar in the Loop?
Yeah, I wasn't there, and she wasn't either, as far as I know.
Maybe with some friends? Dom shrugged, but his eyes were serious. She said she was meeting a client. But who drinks cocktails with a client at a bar? And why didn't she mention it? Dom put the pizza down and wiped his hands. Okay, Vince, don't panic. It might be nothing. But if you're so nervous, I can do some digging. I've got a couple of guys who know where things are in town. Poke around. Vince looked at him. You mean keep an eye on her? Not exactly. Just find out if she was there, with whom. If it's nonsense, you'll calm down. If not, well, then we'll think about it. Vince nodded, but his chest felt heavy. I don't want to believe that she, well, you know, but this check, her behavior. Dom, I don't know what to do. Look, Dom leaned closer. You're my brother, okay? If something's wrong, we'll figure it out. But don't get worked up until you have the facts. Give me a couple of days, I'll find out what's what. Thank you, Dom. Really. Don't thank me, just eat your pizza before it gets cold. Dom pushed the box towards him. And don't tell Emily anything until we're sure. Vince took a bite, but his appetite was gone. He looked at the check lying on the table and felt his life begin to crumble at the seams. When Vince returned home, he found Emily in the living room, sitting on the couch with her laptop. She smiled when she saw him. Hi, darling. You've been gone a long time today, she said, closing her laptop. Yeah, I stopped by Dom's, Vince replied, trying to keep his voice even. We ate pizza and chatted. To the house, Emily raised an eyebrow. What, have you missed his grumbling already? Yeah, something like that, Vince forced a smile. How are you? Work okay? Oh, you know, the usual. Clients, deadlines. Almost fell asleep in the meeting today. She laughed, but Vince noticed her fingers tightening on the edge of the couch. What happened on Thursday? He asked, trying to sound casual. You came back late. Emily blinked but quickly answered. Oh yeah, the meeting with the client dragged on. Boring, but it had to be done. In the office, Vince looked into her eyes. Well, first in the office, then in a cafe nearby. Nothing interesting, she stood up and stretched. I'll go take a shower. Are you going to watch anything? Maybe later, Vince said, feeling his insides tighten. After Emily went upstairs, he sat on the couch and stared at the blank TV screen. Her words sounded convincing, but the check in his pocket said otherwise. Vince knew he couldn't sleep until he knew the truth. He pulled out his phone and texted Dom. Do what you said you would do. Need to know. The answer came a minute later. Understood. Wait for news. Vince leaned back on the couch, listening to the sound of the water running from the bathtub. He felt like he was on the edge of an abyss, and the only thing keeping him going was the hope that he was wrong. The next evening, Vince drove to his parents' house for a family dinner. The Lincoln Park house was full of life. The smell of lasagna, the laughter of cousins, the clink of glasses. The Rossi family gathered once a month, and no one dared miss it, especially with Rosa watching. Vince parked and walked in, immediately falling into his mother's arms. Vincent, Anna Rossi kissed him on both cheeks. You're so skinny, don't you eat at home? Mom, I'm eating, Vince rolled his eyes, but smiled. Where's Dad? In the kitchen, stirring the sauce, Anna waved her hand. Go say hello. Vince found his father, Luigi, at the stove, stirring tomato sauce and humming an Italian song. Hey, Dad, how are you? Vince slapped him on the back. Vince, Luigi turned, wiping his hands on his apron. The sauce is almost done. Where's Emily? She's at work. Vince tried not to show the tension. She's running late. Luigi frowned but nodded. Work, work. Tell her not to forget about her family. I'll tell you, Vince looked away, feeling a pang of guilt. Dinner was noisy. The cousins were arguing about baseball, Anna was scolding someone for not cleaning their plates, and Rose was sitting at the head of the table, watching everyone. Vince tried to be cheerful, but his thoughts kept returning to the check and his conversation with Dom. He caught Rose's eye, and she beckoned him over with her finger. Vincent, come here, she said quietly as he sat down next to her. What, Grandma? Vince tried to smile. Rose looked into his eyes, her gaze sharp as a knife. You have something on your heart. Don't lie to an old woman. It's okay, Vince shrugged. Just tired. It's not okay, Rose squeezed his hand. I see. It's Emily, right? Vince froze, not expecting such directness. Why do you think so? Because I know you, Rose lowered her voice. And I know her. She's not ours. I'm not saying she's bad, but be careful. The Rossi family doesn't tolerate disrespect. Honor is everything, Vincent. Grandma, I'll figure it out, Vince said, but his voice shook. Rose nodded, but did not let go of his hand. If something is wrong, tell Dom. He will help, and so will I. Vince swallowed, feeling the weight of Rose's words. He nodded and returned to the table, but his appetite was gone. The cousins were joking. Anna was pushing lasagna on him, but Vince felt like an outsider. He thought about Dom, about the check, about what he might learn in the next few days. After dinner, Vince helped his mother clear the table. Anna noticed his silence. Vince, are you sure you're okay? She asked, drying her hands on a towel. Yes, Mom, there's just a lot of work, he lied. If something's wrong, tell us. Anna looked at him. We're family. I know, Vince hugged her. Thank you. He stepped out onto the porch to get some air. The night air was cool, and Vince looked up at the stars, feeling the warmth of his family's support, but also the weight of it. Rose was right. Family honor was everything. If Emily had truly betrayed him, he couldn't just turn a blind eye. Vince took out his phone and texted Dom. Dinner went well. Rose smells something. Don't drag it out. The answer came quickly. Rose always senses. I'll start tomorrow. Hold on. Vince pocketed the phone and walked back into the house, where the laughter and conversation continued. He knew his family was behind him, but he also knew that the truth he was seeking could destroy everything he had spent 7 years building. And yet he was ready. He had to know. Vince Rossi stood at the window of his coffee shop on Milwaukee Avenue, watching the Chicago morning come to life. It was 8 a.m. Sunday, and the street was filled with joggers, families pushing strollers, and students with laptops. The shop smelled of freshly brewed espresso, but Vince barely noticed the aroma. His mind was on Emily, her distant gaze over breakfast, her quick glances at her phone, her evasive answers. Vince had been restless since the previous day when Dom Lombardi had promised to look into the receipt from the Luna bar. He had arrived at the shop earlier than usual to take his mind off things, but his suspicions had only grown. "Vince, are you okay?" The voice of Maria, his head barista, broke him out of his thoughts. She was wiping down the counter, looking at him with mild concern. "Huh. Yeah, I'm fine." Vince turned around, forcing a smile. "Just didn't get enough sleep." "Didn't get enough sleep, or did you change your mind?" Maria squinted, putting her cup under the coffee machine. "You've been staring out the window for an hour, as if the answers were there." Vince chuckled, but didn't answer. Maria had worked for him for 5 years, and her directness had always won him over. He went to the counter, picked up a rag, and began helping her wipe down the tables, just to keep his hands busy. "Seriously, what happened?" Maria asked, lowering her voice so the early customers wouldn't hear. "You left yesterday like you'd seen a ghost." "Just family stuff," Vince shrugged, avoiding her gaze. "Nothing like that." "Family matters," Maria snorted. "You tell that to Grandma Rose. If Emily is getting on your nerves, tell her, I'll fix her." Vince couldn't help but laugh, but it was a bitter laugh. "No need, Maria. I'll figure it out." She nodded, but her eyes said she didn't believe it. Vince walked back to the window, feeling his phone vibrate in his pocket. He pulled it out, a text from Emily. "Working at home, then maybe Lindsay's. Where are you?" He wanted to answer, but instead he remembered Friday night dinner with Zach and Lindsay Morgan, which still haunted him. Bistro 312 was packed that night. Vince, Emily, Zach, and Lindsay sat at a table by the window, surrounded by the buzz of conversation and the clink of glasses. Vince was trying to enjoy his meal, but something was wrong. Emily, sitting next to him, seemed distant. She kept grabbing her phone, reading messages, and then quickly hiding the screen. "Emily, are you with us or on another planet?" Vince asked, trying to be funny the third time she looked away. She blinked, smiling. "Sorry, just work." A colleague wrote, "I need to respond." "Friday night?" Vince raised an eyebrow. What kind of coworker is so persistent? "Oh, just Nathan." Emily waved her hand as if it was nothing. "We have a project. He's finalizing the details." Vince nodded, but the name Nathan stuck in his head. Nathan Wilson, her senior colleague, whom she had mentioned a couple of times. He was about to ask more, but Zach, sitting across from him, suddenly spoke up. "Vince, did you watch the game yesterday? The Cubs screwed up again." "Nah, I missed it," Vince replied, noticing Zach's quick glance at Lindsay. Lindsay, usually chatty, was silent, picking at her shrimp. Vince caught her looking at Emily, briefly but intensely. When Emily stood up, saying she had to make a work call, Lindsay immediately began talking about her class as if trying to fill the silence. "We have a new project. Children are drawing a city," she said, but her voice was too high. "Cool," Vince muttered, watching Emily standing outside with the phone pressed to her ear, her expression serious, almost guilty. When she returned, Vince asked, "Did your Nathan decide everything?" "Yeah." Emily sat up, fiddling with her napkin. "Just a little work stuff." But Vince could see that it wasn't a small thing. Zach had been avoiding his gaze all evening, and Lindsay had been chattering nonstop, as if she were afraid of silence. Vince had chalked it up to fatigue, but now, looking back, he realized they knew something. At the coffee shop, Vince returned to the counter where Maria was making a latte for a customer. His phone buzzed again. It was Emily. He hung up, not ready to talk. Instead, he remembered checking her phone that morning while Emily was in the shower. It had been impulsive, but he couldn't stop himself. The receipt from Luna, her distant manner, the dinner it all added up to a grim picture. He took her phone from her bag, entered the password their anniversary, June 15th, and opened her messages. Among the chats with coworkers and Lindsay, there was one with no name, just a number. The messages were short, but they took Vince's breath away. Friday, 8L. Yes, it fits. Right there. I'm waiting. Don't be late. The last one was from yesterday. Are you okay? Call me when you can. Vince almost dropped his phone. Who was L? And where was there? He was about to text, but he heard Emily's footsteps and quickly put the phone back. She didn't notice, but Vince had been feeling paranoia in his throat all day. The coffee shop door clinked and a customer walked in, distracting him. Vince busied himself with his order, but his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't wait any longer. He pulled out his phone and dialed Dom, stepping into a corner so Maria wouldn't hear. Dom answered on the second ring. Vince, what are you doing? I'm at the gas station. Dom's voice was irritated. I looked at her phone, Vince said quietly. There were messages. A number, no name. They were making plans to meet. And yesterday, someone said they were expecting her to call. Damn, Dom was silent. What kind of messages? Tell me. Vince recited, trying not to lose his temper. Dom exhaled. That's not good, bro. But listen, I already found out something. My guy from Luna saw Emily on Thursday, with a guy like 40 in a jacket. Looks like Nathan Wilson, her colleague, the one who runs their department. Vince felt his blood run cold. Nathan, she mentioned him at dinner, said it was work. Work, yeah, Dom chuckled. They were sitting in the corner, drinking cocktails, whispering. The bartender said they looked like they'd been there before. Oh, God, Vince leaned against the wall, feeling like the world was falling apart. Dom, what do I do? Don't do anything, Dom snapped. Don't bother her, don't make a scene. I'll find out who this Nathan is and what kind of guy he is. If this is what you think it is, we'll figure it out. But you keep your cool, okay? How can I? Vince lowered his voice. She's lying to my face. You can, Dom's voice hardened. You're Rossi. We don't break. Give me a couple of days, and don't look at her like you know everything. Vince nodded, even though Dom couldn't see. Okay? Thanks, Dom. Don't thank me, Dom muttered. Family is family. I'll call when I find out more. Vince hung up and walked back to the counter where Maria was already serving a new customer. She glanced at him, but said nothing. Vince picked up a rag and began to wipe the table, but his hands were shaking. Nathan Wilson, then. Vince Rossi sat in the corner of a quiet diner on the outskirts of Chicago, clutching a mug of black coffee. It was Monday morning, and the place smelled of fried bacon and burnt toast, but it was mostly empty. Across from him, Dom Lombardi, his cousin, was munching on a ham sandwich, but his eyes were fixed on Vince. On the table between them lay the sealed manila envelope Dom had brought with him. Vince hesitated to touch it, feeling a knot of fear and anger building inside him. After the call yesterday, when Dom had confirmed that Emily had been seen at the Luna bar with Nathan Wilson, Vince knew the truth would hurt. But he hadn't expected it to come like this. Are you going to open this, or just stare at it all day? Dom nodded at the envelope, sipping his coffee. His voice was calm, but there was a hint of steel in it. Vince swallowed, looking at the envelope as if it were a poisonous snake. I don't know if I'm ready. Ready or not, it's not going to go away. Dom put his sandwich down and leaned closer. Vince, you wanted to know. I did what I promised. Now it's your turn. Vince nodded, but his hand shook as he reached for the envelope. He ripped open the edge and pulled out a stack of glossy photographs. The first one made him stop. Emily and Nathan Wilson at the Luna bar, sitting close, their heads almost touching. Nathan, in an expensive jacket, was smiling, touching her arm. Emily was laughing, her eyes shining in a way Vince hadn't seen in months. Damn, he breathed, moving on to the next photo. There was Emily and Nathan leaving a bar, his arm around her waist. Then there was a shot in Nathan's car, kissing, oblivious to the camera. But the last photo hit the hardest. Emily in their bedroom, in her underwear, with Nathan behind her. It was taken through a window, but their faces were clear. Vince felt the coffee rising in his throat. This is, in our house. His voice was hoarse, almost alien. Dom nodded, his face grim. My boyfriend followed them on Friday. They drove to your place while you were at the coffee shop. The picture was taken through the back window. Vince threw the photographs on the table, clenching his fists. What the hell, Dom? She's in our bed with that bastard? Vince, get a grip. Dom put a hand on his shoulder. I know it's bullshit, but you have to be smarter than that. Smarter? Vince almost shouted, but lowered his voice when he saw the waitress glance back. She's cheating on me, Dom, in our house, and I'm supposed to be smart. Dom sighed, leaning back in his chair. Look, I dug into this Nathan. He's not just her coworker. He's got a reputation for being married. He preys on women like Emily. Smart, slick, knows how to get into her good graces. And that justifies her? Vince spat the words out, feeling his anger boiling up. No, Dom shook his head. But that means she's not the first, and he knew what he was doing. The question is, what are you going to do? Vince stared at the pictures, his eyes locked on Emily. He remembered the day they bought this house, 3 years ago. They were standing in the empty bedroom, laughing, planning where their bed would go. This is going to be our little corner, Emily said then, hugging him. Just you and me, Vince. And maybe a couple of little ones, he teased, kissing her forehead. No rush, she laughed. But yes, someday. That moment had been so vivid, so real. And now this bedroom has been desecrated. Vince clenched his jaw, feeling the memory drown in the mud of betrayal. I want him to pay, Vince said quietly, but his voice shook with anger. And she does, too. The house nodded as if it had expected this. I understand. But if you go and punch him in the face now, it won't solve anything. You'll get into trouble, and she'll get out of it. You have to think with your head. What do you suggest? Vince looked at him, clutching his mug. First of all, lawyer, Dom pulled a business card from his pocket and laid it on the table. This is Mark Caselli, the best divorce lawyer in town. He'll ruin her if this goes to trial. And one more thing, protect your money. Transfer it all to a new account before she comes to her senses. Divorce? Vince blinked, the word hitting him like a hammer. You think I should be. Vince, Dom interrupted, look at these pictures. This isn't a mistake. This is a choice. She chose this idiot over you. Do you want to live with that? Vince shook his head, but there was no answer. He couldn't imagine life without Emily, but he also couldn't imagine looking into her eyes after that. What about Nathan? He asked, lowering his voice. You said he deserved it. Dom narrowed his eyes, as if weighing his words. We can deal with him. I have guys who know how to. Send messages. But that's later. First, we'll protect you. Vince nodded, but his mind was already filled with images of Nathan writhing in pain, Emily begging for forgiveness. He hated himself for thinking these thoughts, but they were stronger than he was. I'll call this Mark, he said finally, and I'll do as you say. But Dom, I won't let this go. I know, Dom clapped him on the shoulder. We'll figure it out, brother, together. The house left, leaving Vince with the photographs. He stuffed them into an envelope, paid for his coffee, and walked outside. Chicago was humming, but to Vince the city had turned gray. He got into his pickup truck and drove to his coffee shop on Milwaukee Avenue, anger and pain battling inside him. The coffee shop was empty, too early for the evening rush. Vince walked behind the counter, ignoring the greeting from Maria, his barista, and locked himself in a small office in the back room. He dropped the envelope on the table and sat staring at it. His hands reached for the photographs, and he pulled them out again, spreading them out in front of him. Each one was like a knife stab. Emily at the moon, laughing with Nathan. Their kiss in the car. And the one in the bedroom, where she looked at Nathan the way she once looked at Vince. He remembered their first night in this house, lying on a mattress on the floor because the bed hadn't arrived yet. "We did it, Vince," Emily whispered, clinging to him. "Our home, our life." "Forever?" he asked, kissing her. "Forever," she answered, and he believed her. The words sounded like a taunt now. Vince clutched the photograph, almost tearing it. He wanted to storm the house, throw the pictures in her face, force her to explain. But Dom's words echoed in his head. "Use your head." Vince knew Dom was right. Emotions would destroy him. He needed a plan. He took out his phone and dialed the number on Mark Caselli's business card. The secretary answered right away. "Mark Caselli's office. How can I help you?" The woman's voice was businesslike. "This is Vince Rossi," he said, trying to keep his voice even. "Dom Lombardi gave me your number. I need a lawyer. For a divorce." "Okay, Mr. Rossi," the woman replied. "Mr. Caselli can meet tomorrow at 10 a.m. Is that okay with you?" "Yeah," Vince swallowed. "That'll do." He hung up and leaned back in his chair, feeling the word divorce weighing on his chest. He didn't want this, but he saw no other way. Emily had betrayed him, and Nathan Wilson was part of that betrayal. Vince closed his eyes, imagining Nathan paying for his actions not just with money, but with pain. And Emily, she would regret it too. Vince Rossi walked into the office of Mark Caselli, a divorce lawyer in a skyscraper in downtown Chicago. It was Tuesday morning, and the glass walls of the office reflected the morning sun, filling the room with a cold light. Vince clutched a folder of documents, feeling his palms sweat. Vince hadn't slept since his conversation with Dom the previous day, when he had seen the photos of Emily with Nathan Wilson. His world was crumbling, but he decided to act. Mark Caselli, recommended by Dom, was known in Illinois as a ruthless divorce lawyer, and Vince hoped that he could protect his interests. Mark, a man in his 50s with gray hair and a sharp gaze, rose from the table, holding out his hand. "Mr. Rossi, good to see you. Dom mentioned your situation. Please sit down." Vince shook hands and sat down, placing the folder on the table. "Thank you for taking the time. I don't know where to start." Mark nodded, opening his notebook. "Let's start with the basics. You want a divorce, right? And do you have evidence of adultery?" Vince swallowed, pulling out the envelope with the photographs. "Yes. Here, this is my wife, Emily, with another man. Nathan Wilson, her colleague." Mark took the photographs, looked through them quickly, and put them back. "This is strong evidence. Illinois has had a no-fault divorce law since 2016, so adultery does not directly affect property division. But these photos may help in negotiations, especially if your wife tries to challenge the terms. Tell us about your finances." Vince recounted the story. 3 coffee shops bringing in a steady income, a joint savings account with Emily worth about $120,000, and a mortgage on a house in Lincoln Park. Mark listened, taking notes. "Okay," he said, putting down his pen. "First, you need to protect your assets. Open a new bank account in your name and transfer half of your savings there that's legal until the divorce is filed. Cut off Emily's access to the joint accounts, but leave enough for current expenses to avoid charges of financial abuse. I'll file a petition for divorce on the grounds of irreconcilable differences. Illinois requires 6 months of separation unless both parties agree, but with your evidence, we can speed up the process." "What about the coffee shops?" Vince asked. "They're mine. I built them." "If the business is registered in your name and was created before the marriage, it's considered premarital property," Mark explained. "But the income from the coffee shops during the marriage is marital property. We can minimize her share, but we need accurate financial statements. Bring them tomorrow." Vince nodded, feeling the weight lift a little. "How long will it take?" "If she signs the agreement, in a couple of months. If she resists, up to a year. But I don't let clients relax." Mark smiled, but his eyes remained cold. "We'll start today. Sign here." Vince signed the agreement, feeling the word divorce become a reality. He walked out of the office, clutching Mark's business card, and headed to the bank. At Chase Bank, he opened a new account, transferred $60,000 from the joint account, and restricted Emily's access, leaving $10,000 for expenses as Mark had advised. Each action was like a hammer blow to their marriage, but Vince couldn't stop. Emily had betrayed him, and he wasn't going to lose everything he'd built. At home, Vince tried to keep his temper. Emily returned from work at 6, throwing her bag on the couch. "Hello," she said, smiling. "How are you today?" "Fine," Vince replied, stirring his spaghetti sauce. "I was at the coffee shop, then ran some errands. How about you?" "Oh, the same as always," Emily shrugged, pulling out her phone. "Meetings, clients, tired as a dog." Vince saw her glance briefly at the screen before putting her phone away. He wanted to ask who she was texting, but instead he said, "Maybe we should have dinner together. It's been a while since we've sat together." Emily blinked as if she hadn't expected it. Sounds great, but I'll probably work after dinner. New project, you know." "I know," Vince nodded, feeling his insides boil. "You've been working a lot lately." She smiled, but her eyes avoided him. Dinner passed in silence, broken only by the clink of forks. Vince looked at Emily, trying to see the wife he loved, but saw only lies. Maintaining the appearance of normalcy was excruciating, but he knew he had to until the plan was ready. Vince Rossi walked into attorney Mark Caselli's office on the 30th floor of a downtown Chicago skyscraper. The morning sun reflected off the glass walls, casting a cold light into the office. Vince clutched a folder of financial documents, his heart pounding. After his conversation with Dom the previous day, when he saw the photos of Emily with Nathan Wilson, Vince had decided to act. Mark, recommended by Dom, was known in Illinois as a tough divorce lawyer, and Vince hoped he could help protect his future. Mark, a man with gray hair and a sharp gaze, rose from the table. "Mr. Rossi, sit down. Dom told me about your situation. What do you have?" Vince sat down, handing over the photographs. "This is my wife, Emily, with Nathan Wilson, her co-worker. I want a divorce." Mark looked through the pictures without changing his expression. "Illinois has had no-fault divorces since 2016, so cheating doesn't affect property division. But these photos will help in negotiations if she challenges the terms. Tell us about finances." Vince explained. "3 coffee shops bringing in about $200,000 a year, a joint savings account with $120,000, and a mortgage on a house in Lincoln Park." Mark took notes. "First priority, protect assets," he said. "Open a new account in your name and transfer half the savings it's legal before filing. Limit her access to the joint accounts, but leave funds for current expenses to avoid accusations of financial siege. I'll file for divorce on the grounds of irreconcilable differences. If she doesn't agree, 6 months separation will be required. Bring the coffee shop's finances tomorrow." "And the business?" Vince asked. "The coffee shops, I started them before marriage." "Premarital property is protected," Mark replied. "But income during the marriage is divided. We'll minimize her share. Sign the agreement and let's get started." Vince signed, feeling the word divorce becoming a reality. He left the office and headed to Chase Bank. There, he opened a new account, transferred $60,000, and restricted Emily's access, leaving $10,000 in the joint account as Mark had advised. Each action was painful, but Vince knew he wouldn't let Emily destroy everything he had built. At home, Vince tried to appear normal. Emily returned from work at 7, throwing her bag on a chair in the living room. "Hi," she said, rubbing her neck. "It's been a hell of a day." "Yeah," Vince stirred his salad, avoiding her gaze. "What happened?" "Oh, clients, as always." Emily pulled out her phone, quickly glancing at the screen. "Had to redo half the presentation." Vince nodded, feeling his insides boil. He wanted to ask about Nathan, but remembered Dom's advice. "Keep a grip on yourself." "Maybe we should have a proper dinner," he suggested, trying to sound warm. "There's soda on the table." Emily smiled, but her eyes were somewhere else. "Sounds great, but I'll probably work later." New project, deadlines. Again, Vince tried not to show the tension. All you do lately is work. Well, it won't be for long, she shrugged, sitting down at the table. I'll clear it up soon. Dinner passed in silence, broken only by the clink of forks. Vince looked at Emily, trying to see the wife he loved, but all he saw was lies. It was excruciating to maintain the facade, but he knew he had to until the plan was ready. Late that night, Vince met Dom in an empty office above a West Side bar owned by a friend of Dom's. The room was cramped and smelled of old wood and beer. Dom was waiting with three men he introduced as people you can trust. All three were burly, hard-faced, and looked like they wouldn't ask too many questions. Vince, this is Ryan, Cal, and Jack, Dom said, pointing at them. They're going to help with Nathan. Vince nodded, shaking their hands. Thank you. This means a lot. Ryan, with short hair and a scar on his cheek, spoke first. Dom explained, we'll make sure he understands, but we need details. They sat down at the shaky table, and Dom began. Nathan Wilson lives in a condo in the West Loop. Emily meets him there a couple times a week, usually after the Luna Bar. Tomorrow night is our chance. Emily told Vince she was working late. Vince clenched his fists as he heard this. I want to be there. I want him to know why. Cal, the most silent one, shook his head. Bad idea. You're too close to it. We can handle it without you. No, Vince looked him in the eye. I have to. It's mine. Dom sighed, but nodded. Okay, but you do as we say. We'll come in when Emily's not around. Quickly and quietly. Jack pulled out his phone, showing a diagram of Nathan's condo. Enter through the service corridor. We'll turn off the cameras for 5 minutes. We pick him up, bring him to a secluded place, and have a conversation. He'll understand that he made a mistake. What about Emily? Vince asked, feeling a twinge of anxiety. Leave her a note, Ryan said. Something like stop it. It'll scare her, but it won't be threatening. She won't know who we are. Vince knew it was illegal. In Illinois, any invasion of privacy could result in charges ranging from trespassing Class 4 felony, up to 3 years, to menacing class a misdemeanor, up to a year. But anger overrode fear. Nathan needed to understand that his actions had a price, and Emily needed to understand the consequences. What conversation? Vince asked, trying to speak calmly. No problem, Dom replied, his voice firm. We'll explain that he crossed the road. Nothing extra. The main thing is that he remembers. Vince nodded, knowing it was better not to know the details. He felt the moral line blurring, but Emily's betrayal drove him forward. They discussed the plan, timing, signals, escape routes. When everyone had left, Dom held Vince. Are you sure you want this? He asked, looking into her eyes. These aren't just words, Vince. I do, Vince replied, though fear and rage were warring inside him. He needs to know what he's done. Dom clapped him on the shoulder. Then see you tomorrow, and don't do anything stupid at home. When Vince got home, he found Emily in the bedroom, scrolling through her tablet. She smiled, but her eyes were tired. You're late, she said, putting the gadget aside. Everything okay? Yeah, I'm at the coffee shop, Vince lied, sitting on the edge of the bed. And you? Same as usual, Emily reached out, but the phone on the nightstand lit up. She quickly grabbed it, reading the message. Oh shit, work. I'll be late again tomorrow. Meeting with the team. Vince felt his blood run cold. With Nathan, he asked, trying to sound even. Well, he'll be there, Emily shrugged, not looking at him. Nothing special. Okay, Vince stood up, hiding the trembling in his hands. Good night. Vince Rossi stood behind the counter of his coffee shop on Milwaukee Avenue, mechanically wiping down the espresso machine. It was a Wednesday morning, and Chicago was bustling outside, with students rushing to class, office workers lining up for lattes, and buskers tuning guitars. The shop smelled of freshly ground beans and warm croissants, but Vince barely noticed the usual bustle. His mind was on tomorrow night, on the ambush he and Dom and his men had planned for Nathan Wilson. After their conversation in the office above the bar last night, where they had discussed how to talk to Nathan, Vince felt anger and fear warring inside. He tried to distract himself with work, but Emily's betrayal and the impending confrontation would not let go. Vince, are you daydreaming again? The voice of Maria, his head barista, broke him out of his thoughts. She was standing at the register, ringing up an order for a customer, but her eyes were fixed on him. Huh? No, it's fine. Vince forced a smile, throwing the rag on the counter. Just thinking. Thoughtful, as if the world was ending, Maria squinted, handing the client a cup. This is the third day. Do you want me to give you some coffee? Maybe you'll wake up. Vince chuckled, shaking his head. I live on coffee as it is. Better tell me, how is the order for beans? Have they arrived? Yes, they came this morning. Maria nodded at the boxes in the corner. But don't change the subject. If something's wrong, I can see it. Vince looked at her, feeling the warmth of her care. Maria had worked with him for 5 years, and her directness was like an anchor in a storm. But he couldn't tell her about Emily, about the photographs, about his plan for revenge. It's just business, Maria, he said, looking away. Family stuff. Well, if anything happens, I'm here, she shrugged, returning to work. And Rose probably already knows everything. Vince couldn't help but smile at the mention of his grandmother. Rose had indeed seen right through him, but he was glad she wasn't there. Her words about family honor would only make him more determined to cross the line. He walked over to a table where a regular customer, an old man named Frank, was reading a newspaper. Frank, how's the coffee? Vince asked, wiping the table. As always, the best in town, Frank winked. Your dad would be proud, Vince. The Rossi family knows their stuff. Vince nodded, feeling a pang of pride. His coffee shops were a continuation of the family legacy his parents had started in the 70s. But Frank's words reminded him that that legacy was at risk, not just because of Emily, but because of what he was about to do. He walked back behind the counter, thinking about how far he'd gone. The plan with Nathan was illegal, and Vince knew it. But his anger drowned out his doubts. Emily greeted him at home with a smile that once made his heart beat faster. She stood at the stove, cooking chicken and vegetables, and the house smelled of spices. Hello, darling, she said, hugging him. How is your day? Vince tensed at her touch, but hugged her back, trying not to give himself away. It's fine. I was in a coffee shop, then I sorted things out with the suppliers. And you? Oh, I survived, Emily laughed, returning to the stove. It's a busy day, but I'm getting by. Would you like some wine? Go ahead, Vince nodded, sitting down at the table. She poured 2 drinks, but he saw her eyes flicker to the phone on the counter. Emily was gentle, even playful, but Vince could tell it was false. Her touch, her laughter, it all felt like an act. He remembered the pictures. Emily with Nathan in their bedroom, her smile for another man. Pain struck his chest, but he forced himself to smile. Is it late again tomorrow? He asked, sipping his wine. Yeah, Emily sighed, stirring her vegetables. Meeting with the team. Nathan was brainstorming, probably until night. Nathan's name was cut like a knife. Vince squeezed his glass but nodded. Good luck. Don't overwork yourself. Emily looked at him, her eyes soft, but Vince could see the lie. Dinner had been spent talking about nothing, but every word Emily said deepened his pain. He wanted to grab her shoulders, ask her why she did it, but he held on, knowing that tomorrow everything would change. That evening, Vince and Emily went to Zach and Lindsay Morgan's West Loop apartment for dinner. Vince didn't want to go, but Emily insisted, saying they needed to unwind. The apartment was cozy, with a view of the city lights, but the atmosphere was tense. Zach, usually chatty, was reserved, and Lindsay bustled about pouring wine and laying out appetizers. So, how's it going, Vince? Zach asked, cutting into the pizza. Are the coffee shops doing well? Yeah, kind of, Vince said, feeling Zach avoid his gaze. And you? How's the restaurant? It's fine, Zach shrugged. It's the season, you know. It's hectic. Lindsay suddenly spoke, her voice too loud. We have a new project at school. The kids are so cute. They are drawing a city, can you imagine? Vince nodded, but he saw her glance at Emily, who was sitting next to him. Emily was checking her phone, smiling at something on the screen. Vince felt his anger rise. He remembered dinner at Bistro 312, when Zach and Lindsay had been acting just as strangely. Now he was sure they knew about Emily and Nathan, but they had kept quiet. Emily, are you with us? Vince asked, trying to be funny as she looked back at her phone. Oh, sorry, she put the phone away, smiling. Work. Nathan sent me an idea for tomorrow. Nathan? Lindsay cleared her throat, her voice shaking. Is he, still on the project? Yeah, Emily nodded, not noticing the tension. He does half the work, honestly. Zach stared at the container LKU, and Lindsay quickly changed the subject to the weather. Vince clutched his fork, playing the role of the unsupervised husband, but inside he was screaming. Zach and Lindsay knew, and their silence was a betrayal. He held on, knowing that tomorrow Nathan would get what was coming to him, and Emily would face the truth. How about we play cards? Lindsay suggested, her smile strained. Go ahead, Vince replied, even though he wanted to leave. The game was sluggish, with cheesy jokes. Vince looked at his friends, at Emily, feeling like an outsider. He kept up a facade, but every glance Emily gave him at her phone, every evasive answer from Zach, fueled his resolve. You're absolutely right. It's a logical flaw. Vince is putting himself at unnecessary risk by revealing his name and identity to Nathan, especially given that the plan is supposed to be secret and secure. It's at odds with the care he and Dom are taking to avoid legal repercussions. Thanks for pointing that out, I'll rework it. Chapter 7, so far, to fix that. Vince won't reveal his name or identity, but will instead focus on Nathan taking what wasn't his, keeping his involvement a secret. The other aspect's careful description of the ambush, avoiding details of violence for YouTube, moral conflict will be preserved, taking into account your request for secrecy. The dialogue will remain lively, the locations unique, and the tone dark and tense. Vince Rossi sat in the passenger seat of a black SUV, parked in the shade of an alley in Chicago's West Loop. It was just after 8 on a Thursday night, and the wet pavement glistened under the streetlights from a recent rain. Nathan Wilson's condo towered across the street, its glass facade reflecting the city lights. Vince clenched his fists, his pulse pounding in his temples. Behind the wheel, Dom Lombardi checked his phone, his expression set in concentration. In the back seat, Ryan, Cal, and Jack, the three ex-military men Dom had recruited for the night, sat silently. The plan was clear: intercept Nathan, talk to him, and leave Emily a warning. Vince knew it was illegal, but Emily and Nathan's betrayal made it all the more difficult. The main thing was to keep his identity hidden. They'll be here soon, Dom said, looking at the screen. The guy at the moon saw them come out. Vince nodded, his eyes still on the condo entrance. His anger was mixed with worry. He wanted Nathan to understand that he had made a mistake, but he couldn't risk his freedom. The house had insisted on anonymity, and Vince had agreed his name and face had to remain hidden. Ryan, in the back seat, checked the radio. The cameras in the corridor are off. 5 minutes. Keep a grip. Dom glanced at Vince. We're doing this quietly. Got it, Vince replied, although inside he was seething. A silver sedan pulled up to the building. Emily got out, her laughter echoing down the street. Nathan was there, tall and in a suit jacket, with a smug smile. They walked into the condo without noticing the SUV. Vince felt the rage tighten in his chest, but he made himself wait. We give them time, Cal said, his voice cold. She'll go into the bathroom, then we'll go in. The minutes dragged on, each one feeling like an hour. Vince imagined Emily and Nathan together, and it was unbearable. Finally, Jack gave the signal on the radio. She's in the bathroom. It's time. Ryan and Cal slipped out of the car, moving silently. Jack stayed at the entrance, watching the street. The house turned to Vince. Stay here until they bring him out. No tricks. Vince nodded, even though he wanted to rush in after them. He watched Ryan and Cal disappear through the service entrance. The silence in the car was oppressive, broken only by the rustle of the radio. Finally, Ryan's voice. "He's with us." Back door. Dom started the engine, pulling up to the back door. Ryan and Cal brought out Nathan, who looked confused, his jacket rumpled. They quickly loaded him into the van parked nearby. Vince got out, adrenaline rushing to his head. "To the warehouse," Dom said, pointing to the van. 10 minutes. The warehouse on the outskirts of Chicago was dark, smelling of damp and old metal. A single lamp cast a dim light on the concrete floor. Nathan stood in the center, his hands tied behind his back, his eyes darting between Dom, Vince, and the military. Vince kept to the shadows, as they had agreed, so Nathan wouldn't see his face. He wanted to talk, but Dom had warned him. No names, no hints. Nathan needed to know he was wrong, but there was no one to talk to. Ryan stepped forward, his voice low and menacing. "You took someone else's. It was a mistake." Nathan swallowed, his face turning pale. "I don't know what you're talking about. Please, I." "You know," Cal snapped, standing next to her. "A married woman. You crossed the line." Vince clenched his fists, feeling the anger demanding an outlet. He wanted to call Emily, to throw his betrayal in Nathan's face, but he kept quiet. Nathan needed to understand that his actions had consequences, but not to connect them to Vince. "It was a mistake," Nathan said, his voice shaking. "I'll stop, I swear." "It's too late," Ryan said, his tone icy. "You'll learn not to touch what doesn't belong to you." Vince turned away, unwilling to watch Ryan and Cal talk to Nathan. He heard only the soft sounds of Nathan muttering, the rustling of footsteps. It didn't last long, but it was enough for Nathan to realize his mistake. Vince knew they would scare him, leave him feeling like he was no longer safe, but with no trace that could lead to the police. When Vince turned around, Nathan was sitting on the floor, pale, his eyes full of fear. Vince felt a mixture of relief and nausea. This was revenge, but it was not enjoyable. "He gets it," Ryan said, wiping his hands on his jacket. "No problem." "Let's go," Dom ordered, heading towards the exit. They left Nathan in the warehouse, knowing he wouldn't run to the police. Shame and fear would do the trick. In the van, Dom pulled out his phone and texted Emily, "Stop it, or you're next." Vince stared out the window, feeling the weight of what he'd done pressed down on his chest. He wanted Emily to be scared, but part of him hated himself for it. "How are you?" Dom asked, not looking at him. Vince was silent. The lights of Chicago flashed past the window, but all he could see was Nathan's face, full of horror. Revenge had been taken, but the pain was not gone. Emily had probably already received the message, and her world was crumbling like his own. Vince Rossi woke up to an empty bed in a house that no longer felt like his. It was Friday morning, and Lincoln Park was busy outside, the birds singing, the neighbor mowing the lawn. But inside Vince, there was a silence, heavy and oppressive. He had crossed a line last night. Nathan Wilson had learned a lesson, and Emily had received a warning. Vince didn't know how she felt about getting the text, "Stop it, or you're next," but he knew she was scared. He stood up, exhausted, weighing on his shoulders, and went down to the kitchen. The coffee maker was cold, the table empty. Emily hadn't come home. Vince checked his phone, no messages, no calls. He knew she was probably with Zach and Lindsay Morgan, their friends who he suspected knew about her affair, but were keeping quiet. The thought fueled his anger, but Vince forced himself to focus. He couldn't let his emotions get the better of him. Today was the day to finish what he'd started, cut ties with Emily and move on. He dialed the number of the warehouse he used to store his coffee supplies. "This is Vince Rossi," he said when they answered. "I need boxes shipped from home. Today. Same address, West Side." "How many boxes?" asked the voice on the other end. 10, maybe more." Vince looked around the living room, where bags of Emily's clothes, books, and makeup were already standing. "I'll get them ready." By midday, Vince had collected everything that reminded him of her: dresses, shoes, framed photographs. He worked in silence, each item a sting. When the movers arrived, he helped load the boxes into the van, feeling their marriage slip away with every move. "Where to?" asked the driver, signing the documents. "To the warehouse," Vince replied, "and it will stay there." He closed the door as the van drove away and sat down on the couch. The emptiness of the house was crushing, but he had no regrets. Emily had made a choice, and now he was making his. Vince drove to the office of Mark Caselli, a lawyer in downtown Chicago. Mark was waiting for him at his desk with a stack of papers and a cup of coffee. "Mr. Rossi," he said, gesturing to a chair, "I've prepared a divorce petition. The grounds are irreconcilable differences. Your financial records are in order, and your business is protected as premarital property. But we need to decide where to file the paperwork." Vince gripped the arms of the chair. "She's probably with her friends, Zach and Lindsay Morgan. Address in the West Loop. I'll give it to you." Mark nodded, making a note. "Okay, I'll send it certified mail today. If she signs without argument, the process will take a couple of months. If not, Illinois requires 6 months of separation. Your evidence of infidelity will help sway the case, but the court doesn't like drama. Keep a cool head." "I'm holding on," Vince replied, though inside he was seething. What next? "Wait for her reaction," Mark said, handing over a copy of the statement. "And don't get into conflicts. Any quarrel can be used against you." Vince nodded, taking the papers. He walked out of the office, his resolve growing. Emily had lost him, and he wasn't going to give her a chance to come back. At home, the phone rang while Vince was sorting the mail. The number was Emily's. He hesitated, but answered, his voice cold. "Vince?" Her voice was shaking, mixed with tears. "What's going on? I got a message last night. Where were you?" "Where were you?" he snapped, clutching the phone. I'm at Lindsay's," Emily sobbed. "I'm scared. Someone knows, Vince. Please, we have to talk." Vince felt his anger flare, but he forced himself to hold it in. He didn't want to listen to her excuses, but he knew the meeting was inevitable. "Tomorrow," he said, "at my house at 7 o'clock, and only on my terms." "Vince, I didn't mean to." She began, but he interrupted. "Tomorrow," he repeated and hung up. Her sobs echoed in his head, but Vince didn't give in. She deserved the fear she felt. He threw the phone on the table and drove to Don's workshop, needing a place to breathe. Lombardi's auto was humming with mechanics working on cars, the radio playing rock, and the smell of oil hanging in the air. Vince found Dom in the office, sorting through bills. "Hey," Dom raised his head, putting the papers aside. "Are you okay?" Vince sat up, rubbing his temples. Emily called, "Scared. Got your message." Dom nodded, his face unreadable. "Good, so it worked. Is she with friends?" "At Zach and Lindsay's," Vince sighed. "I put her stuff in storage. The lawyer is preparing the divorce. I'm meeting with her tomorrow." Dom whistled. "You're fast. Are you sure you're ready for this?" "No," Vince shook his head. "But I have to. She needs to know I know." The office door opened and Carla, Dom's wife, walked in with a bottle of water and a sandwich. Her dark hair was pulled back into a ponytail and her eyes immediately found Vince. "Vince, you look like a truck ran over you," she said, placing the food in front of him. "Eat, or I'll tell Rose." Vince couldn't help but smile. "Thank you, Carla. I'm fine." "It's not okay." She sat down next to me, her voice softening. "The house told me, not everything, but enough. I'm sorry you had to go through that." Vince looked at her, feeling a lump in his throat. Carla was always direct, but her warmth was genuine. "I don't know what to do next," he admitted. "I did what I did, but it didn't get any easier." "And it won't." Carla put her hand on his shoulder. "Not right away. But you're strong, Vince. You're Rossi. We're with you no matter what." "She's right," Dom added, his voice firmer. "You did what you had to. Now close this chapter." Vince nodded, feeling their support giving him strength. He took the sandwich, but didn't eat it, just held it, looking at the floor. Carla and Dom weren't pushing, and that was what he needed. "I'll talk to her tomorrow," he said finally, "and finish this." "Just don't lose your head," Dom warned. "She'll cry and beg. Don't fall for it." "I won't fall for it." Vince clenched his jaw. "She chose." Carla stood up, squeezing his shoulder. "If things get tough, come. The door is open." Vince nodded, feeling warmed by her words. He stayed in the shop until evening, helping Dom with paperwork, rather than return to an empty house. Night had fallen over Chicago when he left, but Vince wasn't afraid of the dark. He prepared himself for the meeting with Emily, knowing it would be their last. Vince Rossi stood at the living room window, looking out onto the quiet street of Lincoln Park. It was just after 6 on a Saturday night, and outside Chicago was gearing up for the weekend. Neighbors walking their dogs, kids riding their bikes. The house was empty. The boxes of Emily's things had gone into storage, the photographs were gone from the shelves, and her scent had faded. Vince clutched his glass of whiskey, though he hadn't taken a sip. Tonight he would see Emily, and this would be the last time they would talk. After the ambush on Nathan Wilson and her panicked call yesterday, Vince knew she was scared. But he wasn't going to forgive her. She had betrayed him, and now it was time to close that chapter. The doorbell rang, cutting through the silence. Vince set his glass down and took a deep breath, bracing himself. He opened the door to find Emily standing there, pale and with dark circles under her eyes. Her hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail, and her fingers were shaking as she clutched her purse. She looked broken, and for a moment Vince felt a twinge of pity, but he quickly suppressed it. "Vince!" Her voice was hoarse, almost a whisper. "Can I come in?" He stepped back, silently gesturing toward the living room. Emily walked in, looking around, and her gaze fell on the empty shelves. She gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. "Everything is gone," she muttered, her eyes filling with tears. "Sit down," Vince said, his voice cold. He pointed to the couch, remaining standing. Emily sank down onto the couch, clutching her purse like a life preserver. "Vince, I'm so sorry. I don't know where to begin. I messed everything up." Vince crossed his arms, feeling his anger boiling. "Start with the truth, for a change." She winced but nodded, wiping away her tears. I had an affair with Nathan Wilson. It started a couple of months ago. I didn't want you to know." Vince clenched his jaw, fighting the urge to scream. "A couple of months?" His voice was low, but trembling with rage. "You slept with him in our house, Emily, in our bed. You lied to me every day, looking me in the eye, and that's all you can say." Emily sobbed, covering her face with her hands. "I don't know why I did it. He was just a crush. It was stupid, Vince. I didn't mean to hurt you." "You didn't want to." Vince stepped forward, his voice rising. "You met him at the Moon, kissed him in his car, brought him to our house. You think that doesn't hurt. You ruined everything we had." Emily looked up. Her eyes were red. "I know, I'm terrible. But I love you, Vince. I always have. This was a mistake, I swear. We can fix it." Vince shook his head, feeling her words cut like a knife. He remembered their wedding, her laughter as they danced to Italian music. He had believed they would be forever. Now those memories were poisoned. "Fix it," he almost laughed, but it was bitter. "You lied to me for months. Every time you said work, every time you checked your phone, you chose him over me. How can I trust you after that?" Emily stood up, stepping towards him, her hands shaking. "Vince, please." I stopped. "After that message last night, I don't know who it was, but I realized I'd gone too far. I won't see him again. Give me a chance." Vince backed away, avoiding her touch. He knew she was referring to the message Dom had sent. "Stop it, or you're next." But he wasn't about to reveal his role in what had happened to Nathan. "Chance." His voice turned icy. "I know everything, Emily. Every meeting, every lie. Do you think I'm blind? I've seen the pictures. I know where you were, with whom, and when." Emily gasped, her face turning white. "Photos? How? Who are you?" "It doesn't matter. Vince snapped. What matters is what you did. You betrayed me, our family, everything we built, and now you think crying will fix it. She fell on the sofa, sobbing. I didn't mean to, Vince. I was stupid, weak, but I love you. Please don't leave me. Vince looked at her, feeling the pain and anger warring inside him. Part of him wanted to hug her, to forget everything, but another part, a bigger part, knew that was impossible. He couldn't live with someone who betrayed him so easily. You don't love me, he said quietly. If you did, you wouldn't have done this. You loved the game, the excitement, but not me. Emily shook her head, her sobs filling the room. It's not true. I love you. I'll do everything to prove it. Vince walked over to the table, picked up the folder with the divorce papers, and placed it in front of her. Sign. That's all I want from you. Emily stared at the papers, her hands shaking. Divorce. Vince, no. We can try therapy, talk. Enough. His voice was sharp, like a blow. I don't want therapy. I don't want your promises. I want you out of my life. She took the pen, but froze, looking at him. Vince, please. This is our marriage. 7 years. You can't just... You destroyed it, he snapped. Not me. You. Sign it, or I'll do it through the courts. And believe me, I have everything to leave you with nothing. Emily sniffled, but opened the folder. Her hand shook as she signed each page. Vince watched, feeling something inside him break. This was the end, and it was inevitable. When she was finished, he took the papers away without looking at her. Go away, he said, pointing to the door. Emily stood up, her face wet with tears. Vince, I never meant to. I'm sorry. Please believe me. He didn't answer as he opened the door. She hesitated, as if hoping he would stop her, but Vince was looking away. Emily walked out, her footsteps fading into the street. Heck closed the door, and the sound of the lock was final. Vince leaned against the wall, feeling the weight of the end of the marriage pressing on his chest. He returned to the living room, picked up a glass of whiskey, and took a sip. The taste was as bitter as his thoughts. Vince Rossi woke up in his Lincoln Park home, but the silence was deafening. It was Monday morning, and Chicago was humming outside, with cars honking and neighbors chatting as they went for walks. Vince lay in bed, staring at the ceiling where the light fixture he and Emily had picked out together had once hung. The room was bare now, just like his life after their conversation the night before. Emily had signed the divorce papers and left, leaving him in an empty house. Vince stood up, feeling a heaviness in his chest, and headed to a coffee shop on Milwaukee Avenue. He was trying to get his life back on track, but every step he took was a reminder of what he had lost. The coffee shop was bustling with activity. Students tapping away at laptops, barista Maria tending to the line. Vince walked behind the counter, putting on an apron, but his movements were mechanical. He poured espresso, greeted customers, but his mind was elsewhere. The emptiness of home was oppressive, and even the coffee shop, his pride, felt foreign. Vince, you're off somewhere again, Maria said, punching in the order. You've been silent like a monk for 2 days now. Just tired, Vince said, wiping down the counter. Business, you know. Maria narrowed her eyes, but did not press. If anything, I'm here, and I'll pour you some coffee if you ask. Vince nodded, feeling the warmth of her support, but he didn't want to talk. He knew he had to move forward, but every time he looked at the empty space where their wedding photo had once been, he was brought back to the pain. By midday, the coffee shop was quiet, and Vince went into the office to check the accounts. But instead of numbers, he saw Emily's face, her tears, her pleas. He hated himself for still feeling sorry, but his anger was stronger. She had chosen Nathan Wilson, and now Vince had to live with it. That evening, there was a knock on the door of the coffee shop, even though it was already closed. Vince looked out and saw Zach and Lindsay Morgan standing outside. Their faces were serious, and he knew why they were there. He opened the door, letting them in. Vince, can I talk? Zach asked, fiddling with his jacket. Come in, Vince pointed to a table by the window, trying to keep his voice even. Lindsay sat up, her eyes red as if she had been crying. Zach remained standing, looking at the floor. We wanted to apologize, Lindsay began, her voice shaking. We knew about Emily and Neutron, and we didn't tell you. It was wrong. Vince crossed his arms, feeling his anger flare. Did you know? How long ago? Zack sighed, finally looking at him. A couple of months. I saw them at the moon once, by accident. They were too close. I told Lindsay, and we tried to stop her. Stop? Vince raised his voice, but held it in. Why didn't you tell me? You were my friends. Lindsay sniffled, wiping her eyes. We didn't mean to hurt you, Vince. Emily swore it would end. We tried to talk her into it, but she wouldn't listen. And Nathan, he laughed at us, said it was none of our business. Vince clenched his fists, remembering Nathan in the warehouse, his scared face. And you decided it was better to remain silent, to allow her to lie to my face. We made a mistake, Zack said, his voice hoarse. I should have come to you right away. But we thought it would pass. I'm sorry, Vince. Vince looked at them, feeling anger mixed with fatigue. Zack and Lindsay had been his friends for almost 10 years, but their silence was a betrayal. He wanted to scream, but instead he nodded. I forgive you, he said quietly. But that doesn't mean things will go back to the way they were before. You chose her side, not mine. Lindsay started crying, and Zack hung his head. We understand, he said, if there's anything we can do. Just leave, Vince stood up, opening the door. I need time. They left, their footsteps fading into the street. Vince locked the door and sat down at the table, feeling the loneliness creeping in. The friendship was damaged, and he didn't know if it could be saved. Later, Vince drove to Dom's West Side workshop. He found him in his office, talking on the phone. Dom hung up when he saw Vince and frowned. You look like shit, he said, leaning back in his chair. What happened? Vince sat up, rubbing his face. Zack and Lindsay came. They apologized. They knew about Emily and Neutron, but they kept quiet. Dom whistled. Seriously? And you didn't kick them out? I wanted to, Vince chuckled. But I forgave, even though the friendship is over. Dom nodded, his eyes serious. Listen, I have news. My boyfriend found out that Nathan is in the hospital. Scared, but alive. Nothing fatal. Silent, just like I thought. Vince felt the tension ease. He didn't regret what happened in the warehouse, but he wasn't proud of it either. Okay, he said, let him keep his mouth shut. It will be, Dom leaned closer. But what about you? Did Emily sign the papers? Yeah, Vince nodded. Yesterday. It's over. Dom clapped him on the shoulder. You did what you had to. Now live, brother. Vince wanted to answer, but the words stuck. He felt relieved, but not happy. Nathan had learned his lesson. Emily was gone, but the emptiness remained. That evening, Vince drove to his parents' house in Little Italy. The smell of tomato sauce and basil greeted him at the door, and the sounds of his family filled the kitchen. His mother, Anna, hugged him, whining that he was losing weight. His father, Luigi, slapped him on the back, shoving a plate of pasta under his arm. But Vince was looking for Rosa, his grandmother, whose intuition always amazed him. He found her in the living room, sitting in an armchair with a cup of tea. Rose looked at him, her eyes sharp as ever. Vincent, she said, pointing to the sofa. Sit down. What's on your heart? Vince sat up, feeling her gaze penetrate his soul. It's complicated, Grandma. Emily and we're done. Rose nodded as if she knew. I saw that she was not ours. But you did the right thing, son. The Rossi family does not tolerate betrayal. Vince swallowed, hiding the truth about Nathan and the ambush. I'm trying, he said, but it's hard. Rose took his hand, her fingers strong. You are stronger than you think. Your grandfather went through war, your father through poverty. You will get through this. I am proud of you, Vincent. Her words warmed him, but the heaviness remained. Vince knew he was keeping some of the truth from her, but her pride sustained him. He nodded, squeezing her hand. Thank you, Rose, he said. That means a lot. Vince Rossi sat in his office at a coffee shop on Milwaukee Avenue, staring at a blank laptop screen. It was a noisy Tuesday morning in Chicago, with cars humming outside and customers ordering lattes and croissants inside. But to Vince, the world was muted, as if the sound had been turned off. It had been a week since Emily had signed the divorce papers and left, and 3 days since he had learned that Nathan Wilson had gotten what was his in an abandoned warehouse. Vince had tried to get back to his normal life running coffee shops, but the scene in the warehouse haunted him. He saw Nathan's terrified face, heard his mutterings, and each time he wondered, was it worth it? Vince rubbed his temples, trying to clear his mind. He didn't regret that Nathan had realized his mistake, but the weight of what he'd done was crushing. This wasn't just revenge, it was a step over the edge, and Vince wasn't sure he could go back. He stood up, went out into the room, and began helping behind the bar, just to keep his hands busy. Maria, his head barista, noticed his tension. "Vince, you're like a zombie," she said, pouring an espresso for a customer. "Haven't slept again?" "I was sleeping," Vince lied, wiping down the counter. "Just been busy." Maria snorted, her dark eyes narrowing. "Things, yeah. You've been like this for a week. It's because of Emily, right?" Vince froze, not expecting directness. Maria knew that he and Emily had broken up. Rumors traveled fast in the coffee shop, but he wasn't sharing details. "I don't want to talk about it," he said, looking away. "I want to." Maria lowered her voice so the clients wouldn't hear. "Listen, I went through this. My ex-husband, Tony, cheated on me for 2 years. I found out, and it almost broke me. But I got out. You can do it too." Vince looked at her, feeling her words catch on. "How did you cope, after everything?" Maria sighed as she handed the customer a cup and walked over to Vince. "At first I wanted to kill him. Seriously, I pictured myself hitting him with a frying pan. But then I realized he wasn't worth my time. I kicked him out, changed the locks, and started over. It hurts, Vince, but you're stronger than you think." Vince nodded. Her story was like a mirror. He hadn't told her about Nathan, about the warehouse, but her words gave perspective. "Thank you, Maria. It helps." "You're welcome," she smiled, poking him in the shoulder. "And take the day off, or else the clients will start complaining about your sullen face." Vince chuckled, but for the first time in days he felt lighter. He returned to the office, but thoughts of revenge were still lingering in his mind. He knew he had to sort himself out, and he remembered Dom's advice. Talk to someone who won't pry. That evening, Vince sat in the office of the therapist Dom had recommended. Dr. Laura Green, a woman in her 40s with warm eyes, pointed to a chair across from him. "Mr. Rossi, Dom said you were going through a tough time," she began, opening her notebook. "Tell me what brought you here." Vince sat back in his chair, feeling out of place. My ex-wife, Emily, cheated on me. We got divorced. I don't know how to live with it." Laura nodded, her voice calm. "Betrayal is a deep wound. What do you feel when you think about it?" Vince clenched his fists, looking at the floor. "Anger, pain. Sometimes I want her to feel what I feel. Sometimes I hate myself for it." "For wanting her to suffer?" Laura asked, her tone neutral. Vince nodded, but didn't mention Nathan. He couldn't talk about the warehouse, about watching Nathan look scared. "I did. Things to feel in control. But it didn't help." Laura made a note. "Control is an illusion, Vincent. You can't change the past, but you can choose how to move forward. What do you want for yourself?" Vince paused. He wanted to get his peace, his family, himself back. But he didn't know how. "I want to stop feeling this emptiness." "It's a process," Laura said. "Anger and loss are part of it. But you're here, and this is the first step. Let's start small. What brings you joy?" Vince remembered the coffee shop, the laughter of the customers, Maria's support. "My job, my family. They keep me afloat." Laura smiled. "Then hold on to this. We'll work on the rest. See you next week?" Vince nodded, feeling that the session hadn't solved everything, but it had given him a point of reference. He walked out into the cool Chicago air, and felt that maybe he could move on. Back at home, Vince checked his phone. A text from Dom. Nathan's out of Chicago. Scared, silent. We're clear. Vince let out a sigh of relief. Nathan was gone, and that meant revenge was over. He wasn't sorry, but he wasn't proud either. It was done, period. The second message was from Emily. Vince, I know you don't want to hear it, but I'm sorry. I accept the divorce. Goodbye. Vince stared at the screen, feeling the pain flare up. He wanted to reply, to tell her how much she had hurt him, but instead he hit delete. Her words meant nothing anymore. He walked into the bedroom, where the last box of Emily's things sat in the corner, forgetting odds and ends he hadn't put away. Vince opened it, finding the scarf he'd given her on their second anniversary. He held it, remembering how she laughed, wrapping the scarf around her neck. He's perfect, Vince, she'd said then, kissing him. You always know what I need. The scarf was just fabric now. Vince threw it in a box, taped it shut, and carried it out to the trash. When he returned, he sat down on the couch, feeling a mixture of freedom and sorrow wash over him. Vince Rossi stood at the counter of his coffee shop on Milwaukee Avenue, leafing through a sketchbook filled with ideas for his fourth location. It was a sunny Wednesday morning in Chicago, and the room was filled with the aroma of freshly brewed espresso and the hubbub of customers. Students typing on laptops, mothers pushing strollers, chatting by the windows. It had been 2 weeks since Emily had left and signed the divorce papers, and a week since Vince had started therapy to deal with the pain of betrayal and the weight of his revenge on Nathan Wilson. The emptiness of his home still weighed heavily on him, but the coffee shop was his sanctuary. It felt like a place where he felt in control, and the idea of a new venture ignited a spark within him. Maria, his head barista, noticed the notebook. Drawing again? She asked, pouring a latte for a customer. Are these plans for a new coffee shop? Yeah, Vince nodded, showing the sketch. I'm thinking of opening in the West Loop. There's a lot of office kids there, and the competitor's coffee is crap. Ambitious, Maria grinned. But you're Vince Rossi. If anyone can handle it, it's you. Vince smiled, feeling her faith in him warm him. He went into the office to call the real estate agent. Mr. Rossi, the agent replied, his cheerful voice echoing over the phone. Got a couple places in the West Loop. One on Madison, 2,000 square feet, renting for $5,000 a month. Interested? Sounds good, Vince said. Can you show me tomorrow? Of course, 10 a.m. will do. The agent asked. Yes, I will, Vince hung up, feeling a surge of energy. The new coffee shop wasn't just a business. It was a way to prove to himself that he wasn't broken. Back in the room, he noticed a young guy at the counter filling out an application. Luca DeMarco, 24, an Italian-American with dark curls and a big smile, was interviewing for a managerial position. Vince invited him into the office. So, Luca, why do you want to work for me? Vince asked, looking over the resume. Luke straightened up, his eyes shining. I grew up in my uncle's coffee shop in Brooklyn. I know what real espresso smells like, and I've seen places like yours become the heart of a neighborhood. I want to be a part of that. Vince nodded, recognizing in Luke his younger self hungry for action, full of ideas. What will you do if a client starts yelling because of cold coffee? Luke chuckled. I'll smile, apologize, pour a new one, and maybe offer a bun on the house. The client will leave happy. Not bad, Vince extended his hand. You'll start next week. Don't let me down. Luke shook hands, beaming. I won't let you down, boss. Thank you. Vince watched Luca leave, feeling that hiring a new person was a step forward. Luca brought a fresh energy, and Vince hoped that it would infect him. That evening, Vince drove to Dom and Carla Lombardi's house in Edgewater for dinner. The apartment was cozy, with the smell of roasting garlic and the sound of jazz on the speakers. Carla greeted him at the door, hugging him like a brother. Vince, she exclaimed, pulling him in. You're just in time. I just got out the lasagna. Smells like Mom's, Vince smiled, handing her a bottle of wine. Dom walked out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. Hey, brother, how are you? You don't look like a dead person. That's progress. Thanks, Dom. Vince rolled his eyes as he sat down at the table. The dinner was warm, with jokes and stories. Carla asked about coffee shops. Dom teased her about the oversalted sauce. But when Carla went to get dessert, Dom lowered his voice. I heard Nathan left Chicago, he said. My boyfriend says he's not coming back. How are you? Vince nodded, feeling a weight lift. Good. That closes the case. What about Emily? Dom narrowed his eyes. What's wrong with her? She sent a message. Vince shrugged. She apologized, accepted the divorce. I deleted it. Dom clapped him on the shoulder. Well done. Now live, Vince. Time to move on. Carla returned with the tiramisu, setting down the plates. What are you whispering about? Vince, you need to start dating. Stop moping around. Vince choked on his wine. Carla, I just got divorced. Give me a year. A year? She snorted. You've got half the girls in Chicago waiting. Find someone who appreciates you. She's right, Dom added, grinning. But don't rush. The main thing is, don't sit alone. Vince shook his head, but their concern warmed him. He wasn't ready for another relationship, but Carla and Dom's words reminded him that he wasn't alone. His family and friends were there, and that gave him strength. The next day, Vince drove to Grandma Rose's house in Little Italy. She was sitting on the porch, wrapped in a shawl, drinking espresso. Her eyes, sharp as ever, found him as soon as he stepped out of the car. Vincent, she said, gesturing to the chair next to her. You're looking better, but you're still not sleeping. Vince sat up, feeling her intuition penetrate his soul. I'm working on it, Grandma. Planning a new coffee shop. Rose nodded, a smile touching her lips. Good. The Rossies don't sit idle. But what's inside you? Vince sighed as he looked out onto the street. Emily is gone. I'm trying to start over, but it's hard. Sometimes it feels like I've lost myself. Rose took his hand. Her fingers were warm. When I came to America, all I had was your grandfather and a suitcase. We were starving, sleeping on the floor. But we fought. You're fighting too, Vincent. You've lost love, but not yourself. You're Rossi. We fall, but we get up. Vince felt her words strengthen him. He hadn't told her about Nathan, about the warehouse, but her stories about the past reminded him that resilience was in his blood. How did you cope? He asked. When things were at their worst. I prayed, I worked, and I kept my family close. Rose looked at him. You do the same. Your coffee shops are your heart. Your family is your strength. Don't forget. Vince nodded, squeezing her hand. Thank you, Rose. I won't forget. She smiled, patting his cheek. And find a good girl, but not like that one. Vince laughed, genuinely for the first time in weeks, and drove away feeling grounded by her wisdom. Vince Rossi was opening his coffee shop on Milwaukee Avenue when a man in a gray suit appeared at the door. It was a Thursday morning, and Chicago was waking up, with street vendors laying out fruit and early customers rushing for coffee. The man in his 40s, with a crew cut and a keen eye, held a notepad and introduced himself as Vince approached the counter. Mr. Rossi, his voice was even but insistent. I'm Richard Kane, private investigator. Can I talk? Vince tensed, but nodded, gesturing to a table in the corner. His heart pounded. He knew this had to be connected to Nathan Wilson. It had been more than 2 weeks since that night in the warehouse, and Dom had assured him there was no trace. But the detective's visit reminded Vince of the risks he had taken. What are you talking about? Vince asked, sitting down and trying to look calm. Kane opened the notebook with a click of his pen. I work for a lawyer named Nathan Wilson. He recently got into trouble, an incident that left him scared. Mentions that it may be related to a personal conflict. Your name came up. Vince felt a chill in his chest, but kept his expression neutral. Nathan Wilson, my ex-wife's colleague. I barely know him. What was the incident? Kane narrowed his eyes, as if weighing his words. Let's just say someone decided he crossed the road. No police reports, but my client wants to know who's behind this. Do you know anything? Vince shook his head, his voice firm. Nothing. Emily and I are divorced, but I don't spy on her coworkers. If Nathan has problems, it's not me. Kane made a note, his gaze never leaving Vince. Where were you on the evening of June 19th, around 9? Vince knew it was the date of the ambush. Dom and his men had made sure there was no evidence left. The cameras were turned off, there were no witnesses, and Nathan had not seen his face. At home, Vince lied, looking Kane in the eye. Working on plans for a new coffee shop. I can show you my notes if you need them. Kane paused, then closed his notebook. It won't be necessary. For now, if you remember anything, here's my card. He held out a card, which Vince took without looking. Kane walked away, leaving behind the scent of cologne and a sense of unease. Vince returned to the counter, adrenaline pumping through his temples. The encounter had jolted him, reminding him that revenge could have consequences. He texted Dom. Detective came by. Asked about Nathan. Got away with it. A minute later, he replied, Relax. We're in the clear. Keep your mouth shut. Vince exhaled, but the anxiety didn't go away. He knew he had to be vigilant. That afternoon, Vince met Zach and Lindsay Morgan at a cafe in the West Loop, not far from their home. After they apologized for keeping quiet about Emily's affair, he agreed to talk, but the friendship was soured. The cafe was noisy, with the smell of freshly baked goods and the clink of teacups. Zach and Lindsay were already waiting at a table, their faces tense. Vince, thanks for coming, Lindsay said, fiddling with her napkin. I want to try to make things work. Vince nodded, sipping his coffee. I'm listening. Zach coughed, looking into his cup. We know we let you down. We should have told you about Emily right away, but we were afraid it would ruin everything. Now we realize we made it worse. Yes, we did, Vince said evenly, but the anger was still smoldering. You were my friends, and you chose her lies. Lindsay swallowed, her eyes shining. We didn't choose, Vince. We just got confused. But you're right. We want to fix this if you give us a chance. Vince looked at them, feeling the pain mix with fatigue. Zach and Lindsay had been a part of his life for 10 years, and he didn't want to lose them forever. But the trust had been broken. I hold no grudge, he said finally. But we'll have to start from scratch. And slowly. Zach nodded, his shoulders relaxing. That's fair. We're ready, Vince. Lindsay smiled, wiping her eyes. Thank you. You are better than we deserve. They talked some more about small things work, the weather, but Vince felt the distance. The friendship might have been rekindled, but it was no longer the same. He left feeling relieved, but also aware that some wounds heal slowly. Back at the coffee shop, Vince found an envelope on the table, delivered by courier. He recognized the handwriting of attorney Mark Caselli and opened it. Inside were Emily's signed divorce papers. Her signature, neat and clear, was the final touch to their marriage. Vince stared at the papers, feeling the finality wash over him. He was free, but the freedom was bittersweet. 7 years of love, plans, promises, ended like that on a piece of paper. He called Mark to confirm. Got the papers, Vince said, his voice even. What next? Great, Mark replied. I'll take them to court tomorrow. If there are no disputes, the divorce will be finalized in a couple of months. Are you hanging in there? I try, Vince sighed. Thank you. He hung up and stuffed the papers into a drawer. Part of him wanted to call Emily, ask how she was, but he resisted the urge. She was in the past, and he had to look forward. That evening, Vince drove to the West Loop to look at a space for a new coffee shop. An agent was waiting for him at an empty building on Madison Street, with storefronts from floor to ceiling and a spacious hall. This place is awesome, the agent said, opening the door. Lots of light, offices nearby. There'll be a crowd. Vince walked around the room, imagining the counter, the tables, the smell of coffee. I think it will do. Let's discuss the contract. Vince Rossi stood in a vacant lot in the West Loop, where construction was beginning on his fourth coffee shop. It was a cool Friday morning in Chicago, with a light breeze blowing off the river. Workers in orange vests unloaded materials, and a bulldozer rumbled as it leveled the ground. Vince held the plans in his hands, but his eyes were fixed on the site. This was more than a construction site, it was a milestone, a symbol of his recovery from his divorce from Emily and the shadows of his past, including the night Nathan Wilson learned his lesson. Today, surrounded by his family and employees, Vince felt like he was stepping into the future. Maria, his head barista, clapped him on the shoulder, smirking. "So, boss, ready to become a coffee magnate?" she teased, adjusting her cap. "It already is," Vince replied, smiling. "It's just the next level." Standing nearby was Luca DeMarco, the new manager Vince had hired a week earlier, his curly hair sticking out from under his baseball cap and his eyes shining with enthusiasm. "This is going to be awesome, Vince. I can already see a line at the opening." "If you say so, Luca, I believe you." Vince patted him on the back. The family was there too. His mother Anna bustling about handing out sandwiches to the workers, his father Luigi discussing the construction with the foreman, and his grandmother Rosa sitting in a folding chair, watching them all with quiet pride. Vince walked over to sit down next to her. "What do you think, Rose?" he asked, pointing to the platform. "Is it a good place?" She looked at him, her eyes sharp but warm. "Good, Vincent. But it's not the place that matters, it's you. You're not just building a coffee shop. You're building yourself." Vince nodded, feeling her words sink into his chest. Rose always saw more than he said, and her presence gave him strength. He stood as the foreman called for work to begin, and the crowd workers, family, co-workers applauded as the first bucket of dirt rose into the air. Vince watched the site come alive and felt a surge of hope. This was his new dawn. After the ceremony, Vince helped Maria clear the refreshment table. She was in high spirits, humming to herself. "You're really glowing today," Vince remarked, folding the napkins. "Yeah, because it's cool." Maria nudged him with her elbow. "You're doing something big, Vince. I'm proud of you." "Thank you," he smiled, feeling the warmth of her words. "I couldn't have done it without you." Maria rolled her eyes, but her smile widened. "Hey, there's a festival at Millennium Park on Saturday, food, music, stuff. Want to come with me? It'll be fun." Vince blinked, not expecting the invitation. He had known Maria for years, but this was the first time she had suggested something outside of work. Her tone was friendly, but there was a glint in her eyes that suggested something more. "Festival." He scratched the back of his head. "I don't know. I'm not much of a party person." "Oh, come on," Maria poked him again. "Stop sitting in your office like an old man. Let's go dance and have some tacos. Life doesn't wait, Vince." He laughed, feeling her energy was infectious. "Okay, you've convinced me. But if I disgrace myself at the dance, it's on you." "Agreed," she winked, walking away to the car. Vince watched her go, feeling a lightness he hadn't felt in months. He wasn't ready for romance, but a friendship with Maria or something more in the future felt possible. It was a small step, but an important one. That evening, Vince stopped by Dom Lombardi's shop on the west side. Dom was tinkering with an old Chevy engine, but he put his tools down when he saw Vince. "Hey, Coffee King," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "How's the construction going?" "Here we go." Vince sat down on the box, feeling tired. "It feels like something real." "This is real." Dom opened the fridge, throwing him a bottle of water. "You're moving forward. I'm proud of you, brother." Vince nodded, taking a sip of water. "Any news?" he asked, knowing Dom was keeping an eye on Nathan's situation. Dom leaned against the workbench, his face serious. "My boyfriend says Nathan has given up on any legal action. He's scared shitless and doesn't want to get involved. We're in the clear." Vince exhaled, feeling the last of the weight lift. Nathan had left Chicago without filing a lawsuit, which meant that night in the warehouse was a thing of the past. He didn't regret it, but the relief was greater than he'd expected. "Okay," he said. "This is the end." "It's over," Dom agreed. "Live now, Vince. Don't look back." Vince nodded, feeling Dom's words sink in. He didn't look back, but the shadows of the past were still there. The new coffee shop, the support of friends and family helped him move forward, and he was ready. The next day, Vince drove to see Rose at her house in Little Italy. She was sitting in the garden, watering the basil, her shawl fluttering in the breeze. When she saw Vince, she smiled and pointed to a chair. "Vincent," she said, setting down the watering can, "you look alive. That's good." Vince sat up, inhaling the scent of herbs. "I started building a new coffee shop, Rose, and I feel better." Rose looked at him, her eyes wise. "You've always been a fighter, like your grandfather, but you carry pain. It's time to let it go." Vince swallowed, feeling her words sting. He hadn't told her about Nate, about revenge, but Rose seemed to know more than he was letting on. "How do I do that?" he asked. "Let go." "Live," she replied, her voice firm. "Love your work, your family. Find joy. You're young, Vincent. The world awaits you. I bless you to live again." Vince felt the lump in his throat dissolve. He took her hand, squeezing it. "Thank you, Rose. I'll try." She patted his cheek, smiling. "And come with a new girl." Vince laughed, shaking his head. He drove away, feeling her blessing, giving him strength. Rose had seen his heart, and her faith in him was an anchor. Vince Rossi stood behind the counter of his new coffee shop on Madison Street in the West Loop, looking out over the bustling crowd. It was a Saturday morning in Chicago in late September 2025, and the city was buzzing with autumn energy, with scarfed pedestrians hurrying along the sidewalks and leaves swirling in the air. The shop, opened 3 months ago, was thriving, tables filled with office workers, students, and families, the aroma of freshly brewed espresso mingling with the hubbub of conversation. Vince adjusted his apron, feeling a mixture of pride and relief. After his divorce from Emily, Nathan Wilson's betrayal, and that dark night when he crossed a line, this coffee shop had become his anchor, a symbol of a new beginning. "Vince, have you seen the line?" she said, pouring cappuccino. "We're breaking records." "I saw it," Vince smiled, handing the customer a croissant. "You and Luca do magic." Luca DeMarco, the young manager Vince had hired 6 months earlier, burst out of the back room with a box of coffee beans, his curls bouncing and his smile infectious. "Boss, I ordered more Brazilian beans," he said. "And I came up with a promotion. Coffee for a smile on Fridays. How do you like it?" "Brilliant," Vince clapped him on the shoulder. "Just make sure Maria doesn't nag if someone smiles crookedly." "Hey, I'm only nagging at you." Maria poked Vince with a spoon, causing Luca to laugh. Vince watched them, feeling a warmth he hadn't felt in months. Maria and Luca were more than co-workers, they were his new family at work. Their friendship had deepened since the Millennium Park Festival Maria had dragged him to last month. They'd danced to jazz, eaten tacos, and talked until midnight, and Vince found himself smiling like he used to. He wasn't ready for romance, but her presence brightened his days. "Vince, don't dream," Maria poked him again. "Go check the supplies. Luca, you're at the cash register." "Yes, Captain," Luca saluted, jumping to the cash register. Vince laughed as he headed to the back room. He knew the coffee shop wasn't just a business. It was his way of redemption, proof that he wasn't broken. That evening, Vince drove to Little Italy for a family gathering at his parents'. The Rossi house was full of life. The smell of lasagna, the laughter of his cousins, the clink of glasses. Anna, his mother, hugged him at the door, lamenting that he was not eating enough. Luigi, his father, handed him a plate of pasta, telling him about his new tomato patch. But Vince was looking for Rosa, whose wisdom had always been his rock. He found her in the living room, seated at the head of the table. Rose raised her glass of wine, her eyes shining. "Vincent," she said when everyone was quiet, "we will drink with you tonight. You've been through a storm, but you're not broken. You're Rossi, and we're proud." The family applauded, the cousins shouted, "Bravo," and Anna wiped away tears. Vince felt a lump in his throat, but he smiled. Rose didn't know the whole truth about Nathan, about the warehouse, but her toast subtly acknowledged his struggle. He raised his glass, meeting her gaze. "Thank you, Rose," he said, "and to all of you. I couldn't have done it without you." Dinner was loud, with stories of the past and plans for the future. Vince sat between his mother and cousin, feeling the warmth of family. He thought about his journey, the rage after Emily's betrayal, the revenge on Nathan, the pain of divorce. It had all left scars, but now he saw the light. Family, coffee shops, new connections, this was his legacy, and he wouldn't let the past define him. "Vince, when's the wedding?" Cousin Tony teased, grinning. "I heard you went to the festival with Maria." "Tony, shut up." Vince rolled his eyes, causing laughter. "We're friends." "Bye, friends," Anna winked, causing another burst of laughter. Vince shook his head, but he was smiling. For the first time, the thought of the future wasn't scary. He didn't know what would happen to Maria, but he was open to the possibilities. Later, Vince stopped by Dom Lombardi's shop to share the news. Dom was tinkering with his motorcycle, but put the wrench down when he saw Vince. "Hey, magnate," he said, wiping his hands. "How's the new coffee shop?" "It's flying." Vince sat down on the box. "Luca came up with the idea. Maria keeps everyone on their toes." "And what about you?" "As always," Dom grinned. "But I hear you're the star of the family now. Rose is toasting you." Vince nodded, feeling warm. "She knows how to lift your spirits. Listen, Dom, thank you for everything. I wouldn't have made it without you." Dom waved his hand, but his eyes were serious. "Family, Vince, we're always here for you. And stay out of trouble, okay?" "Okay," Vince smiled, knowing Dom meant Nathan. They talked about motorcycles, coffee shops, and life. Vince left feeling that Dom was his anchor, as was Rose. The past was behind him, and he was ready for new horizons. Vince drove through Chicago at sunset, heading home. The lights of the skyscrapers reflected off the river, creating a mosaic of light. He thought about his journey, from the rage of Emily's betrayal to his revenge on Nathan, from the pain of his divorce to opening a new coffee shop. Each wound made him stronger. Each support from Maria, Luca, Dom, Rosa gave him purpose. He was no longer the man Emily had defined. He was Vince Rossi, a builder, a survivor, ready for something new. Vince stopped by the river, looking out over the city. The sunset was turning the sky gold, and he felt hope rising. The coffee shop was thriving. His bond with Maria and Luca was growing. His family was close. The past had left scars, but they hadn't broken him. He started the car, smiling. Chicago was shining, and Vince knew the road ahead was full of possibilities. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.